All right. Bye-bye.
Okay. Couple more items for all of you, and then we'll try to get around to as many people as we can in the time we have left together. Yesterday, CISA and the FBI urged organizations to remain vigilant to ransomware and other cyber threats this Thanksgiving holiday. We've seen in the past that sometimes those threats, there's an uptick around holidays, so we're mindful of that. Their advisory is based on that. The advisory lists best practices and recommendations for organizations to implement, including multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, to identify IT employees for weekends and holidays in the event of an incident, and more. We urge organizations to take a look at this advisory and implement these best practices before heading into the holidays. And this info is available online at stopransomware.gov. Today, the Department of Health and Human Services began distributing $7.5 billion in American Rescue Plan payments to more than 40,000 rural health providers in all 50 states who serve Medicaid, Medicare, and CHIP beneficiaries. Healthcare providers in rural communities have historically faced significant financial challenges, which the pandemic has only made worse, and these payments are a key part of the administration's effort and commitment to keeping rural hospital doors open. Also wanted to note, as we gear up for Small Business Saturday this week, go to your local small businesses on Saturday, give it a little plug. We have good news from Etsy, which represents over 5 million small businesses. The Etsy CEO, Josh Silverman, said that Etsy sellers are, quote, well positioned to meet customer demand. And according to survey data, Etsy small businesses are, quote, less concerned about supply chain challenges this year than they were last year. And Small Business for America's Future, which represents a network of 80,000 small businesses, says their owners are prepared to handle increased demands of the holiday season. In addition to these strong reports from small businesses, major retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods and Best Buy are also ready for Black Friday and the holiday season. Today, the Best Buy CEO said, quote, we are looking forward to a strong holiday season and believe we are strongly well positioned for both what tech customers want and fast and convenient ways to get it. With that, Josh, do you have any more questions?
I have just two more quick ones. First, what's the status of FARC? Is it being delisted as a terrorist group?
I don't have any update on that. I'm happy to check with our national security team and see if there's anything we can get to all of you.
Secondly, Apple is suing the spyware firm NSO Group. The U.S. recently blacklisted NSO. Does the administration have any additional thoughts on these foreign companies operating in the U.S. that might be snooping in on political activists, journalists, and dissidents? How do you protect people who use their phones and make them feel safe?
Well, I will also talk to our national security team about this. I suspect we're not going to weigh in too much, given it sounds like it's a case of litigation. But I will say, broadly speaking, obviously we're trying to do everything we can to help prepare and provide guidance to private sector companies and entities out there, many of whom are providers to customers and provide services to customers as we head into holiday seasons where we see upticks in cyber threats or ransomware attacks, to ensure that customers can feel confident and the American people can feel confident. And our view is that is a role the private sector and the public sector can and should play together. That's something we're uniquely doing in this administration that hasn't been done in the past. But I will check and see if there's more to offer on that as well. Alex.
Thank you. Me, Alex. Okay. I was wondering
or another Alex. There's another one over here. Either way.
I wanted to know if the U.S. has been in contact with Saudi Arabia or Russia about this move and what has happened as part of those discussions.
We have been in touch with OPEC member countries. As you know, there's an OPEC meeting, OPEC Plus meeting coming up next week, and we are certainly aware of that and mindful of that. We've been clear that our preference was producing countries take action, but we were clear we would also use tools, our own tools, to take action, meaning we were asking for an increase in supply, but also made clear in our conversations we would use our own tools as needed. As you know, we're not a party to OPEC Plus, and we, of course, can't speak to them, but we know that the world needs oil supply to meet the growing demand as the world emerges from the pandemic. OPEC Plus has said they will release an additional 400,000 barrels, and our hope and expectation is that they will continue and abide by that commitment when they meet next week. Go ahead, Jeff.
The reserve was created for emergency purposes. Does the president believe that this is an emergency of an energy sake or more of a political crisis?
Well, we're emerging from a once-in-a-century pandemic, and the supply of oil has not kept up with demand as the global economy has emerged from the pandemic. So it's certainly something that we are not just experiencing here in the United States in terms of the supply issues, but many countries around the world globally are experiencing it, and the price of gas is also up around the world. I would note that this is not technically an emergency release, but tailored to market circumstances. The Department of Energy has brought authority to do exchanges, which, as you know, 18 million barrels of this sale is in fact congressionally mandated, and the other set of barrels is through an exchange. So we don't even classify it as an emergency. It's under the authority of the Department of Energy.
But is this being done primarily to try and stave off a political crisis?
This is being done in order to use every tool at the president's disposal to lower the price of gas for the American people. And it follows a step he took last week where he sent a letter to the FTC asking them to look into what we see as a concerning trend where there's an increase in supply of oil and not a decrease in the price of gas, something he's asked the FTC to look into because that's not aligned with what our expectation or the American people's expectation should be. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. Just following up on that, we've heard certainly from some critics who say that this should only be used for supply disruptions. Previously, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer also said that it should only be used not for the rise in prices, but just a collapse in times of an emergency. What is your response to critics who say that this sets a dangerous precedent?
I think our response is that we're emerging from a once-in-a-century pandemic. We're hopeful we're not going to face an emergence from a once-in-a-century pandemic in the future, and that we're using existing authorities, both in the form of moving up the 18 million barrels of sale that is congressionally mandated, and also using authorities that the Department of Energy have. And that as the President of the United States, or as the White House, or the federal government, we have a responsibility to do everything we can to ease the burden, cut costs for the American people. If there are other proposals out there, we'd be happy to hear them. But the President's going to use every step, use every tool in his toolbox to help address these costs for people across the country.
And just one quick follow-up to Monica's earlier question. The White House is not ruling out any possible further action if the prices do not obviously settle down here. Could we possibly see that by the end of the year? Is that off the table?
Well, we're continuing to evaluate. Obviously, we have a whole month left in the year, so I don't want to give you a timeline from here, but we'll continue to monitor prices. We'll continue to monitor supply, and this is obviously a top priority for the President. Go ahead.
Well, and following up on all these as well, to be more explicit, do you rule out releasing more from the reserves if prices don't go down?
I'm not going to rule out options from here. Obviously, we're emphasizing a significant step the President took today. The Department of Energy is preparing to take, as you heard from our guest at the briefing room today. We're looking at a range of options. We will continue to, but we feel this is an important step, something that, as the Secretary noted, over the last several weeks, as these discussions have happened and as other countries have announced parallel releases, we've seen the oil prices go down about 10%. But I don't have anything to predict, preview, or rule out for you here today.
Just two more quick follow-ups. The Japanese were quoted this morning as saying they weren't certain yet when or how they would do this. So who exactly has committed, other than us, to doing this?
Well, I think, one, there have been a number of countries who have already announced planned releases, including China, including India, Japan, Japan, I think, has the intention to, the Republic of Korea, and the United Kingdom. So there are a number of countries that either have or will. That's part of the discussions we've had. I don't want to obviously speak for them. These are just the countries we've had discussions with, I should say, to be more specific.
Yes, there's no confusion. You're not the spokesperson for the Japanese.
No, I have enough on my plate.
And then just real quick, you keep mentioning, and others have mentioned this letter from the FTC, or to the FTC.
Yeah.
Have you heard back from the FTC?
They're obviously an independent actor, and we will let them speak for themselves. I would point you to the fact that we sent a letter to them earlier this year where we expressed a concern about kind of monopolies or oil conglomeration of oil companies. That's something they responded and took action, but I would point you to them for any intention of their response. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. A couple days ago, President Biden was in Michigan, and he was thanking Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib for the passport into her district. Now she is supporting legislation that would release all federal prisoners within 10 years. Would the president ever support that?
Well, the president did enjoy visiting Michigan and visiting Congresswoman Tlaib's district, but let me be absolutely clear. The president does not support abolishing prisons. He does not support defunding the police. He thinks measures like that will make us less safe, and he would not support legislation that includes it. What he does support is effective and accountable community policing and a fair justice system, and he supports investment in public health, education, the environment, housing, community-based programs. But he knows there are steps, and he believes there are steps that we know are going to reduce crime and make our neighborhoods safer, but that is not one of them in his view.
Another topic. Would the president ever apologize to the acquitted Kenosha shooter Kyle Rittenhouse for suggesting online and on TV that he is a white supremacist?
Well, let's be clear what we're talking about here. This is about a campaign video released last year that used President Trump's own words during a debate as he refused to condemn white supremacists and militia groups. And President Trump, as we know from history, and as many of you covered, didn't just refuse to condemn militia groups on the debate stage, he actively encouraged them throughout his presidency. So, what we've seen are the tragic consequences of that. When people think it's okay to take the law into their own hands instead of allowing law enforcement to do its job. And the president believes in condemning hatred, division, and violence. That's exactly what was done in that video.
But if you're saying that it was just a campaign video, it wasn't. The president also gave an interview where he said this Rittenhouse was part of a militia coming out of Illinois. Have you ever heard this president referring to Trump say one negative thing about white supremacists? These are all things, none of this was proven in the trial. And Kyle Rittenhouse is saying that the president had actual malice in defaming his character. Is that what happened here?
The president spoke to the verdict last week. He has obviously condemned the hatred and division and violence we've seen around the country by groups like the Proud Boys and groups that that individual has posed in photos with. But beyond that, I'll leave it to his comments around the verdict.
And then just one more topic. What message does it send to the middle-class Americans President Biden says that he's trying to help, who are struggling this week to cover the cost of the most expensive Thanksgiving ever, that the president is going to take a few days off at a billionaire's compound in Nantucket?
Well, first I would say, I don't know if you've cooked a turkey before, but a 20-pound turkey is a pretty big turkey. I think we can all agree. They're about $1 more. So not to minimize that, any increase in prices is something the president is concerned about, as is evidenced by his announcement today and as his efforts to push forward on additional relief for the American people. But I just want to be clear that there are abundance of turkeys available. They're about $1 more for a 20-pound bird, which is a huge bird if you're feeding a very big family. And that's something that, again, we've been working to make sure people have more money in their pockets to address it as the economy is turning back on.
But the president said today that he was sent here to look out for these working and middle-class families who are strained right now. So what should they read into him leaving now at this time of great personal financial hardship for so many to go to Nantucket for the week?
Well, first I would say, Peter, that I hope you're spending time with your family. I'm spending time with my family, and I hope everybody in here is spending time with their families. This is a time to put politics aside, spend time with your loved ones, and talk about what you're grateful for. I will also tell you from spending some time working for this president and a past president that you are president no matter where you are. He will conduct his work from wherever he is, on any vacation, on any time he is in Delaware, at Camp David, or wherever he may be spending time with his loved ones. He has secure phone capabilities. He has staff traveling with him, and I think the American people can be assured that he will continue to press to lower their costs and ensure they have more breathing room. Go ahead, Monica.
Jen, I'm curious because of the president's comments about the deadly events in Charlottesville being an inspiration for his decision to run for president. Has he been following the Unite the Right trial, and is there any White House reaction to the partial verdict today?
I'm not going to comment on it until there's a final verdict, nor will the president. I will say, obviously, it's been covered extensively on television, so I'm sure, like many people, he has seen some components of it as he's gone about his duties from the Oval Office. But I would just reiterate, broadly speaking, that the president has spoken to his concerns about the division that we've seen in the country spurred over the last couple of years, the allowance of violence in some cases, the fact that white supremacists have been able to run freely around the country in moments in protests, and that's of concern to the president. That is one of the reasons why he ran, and addressing racial injustice. Certainly not something that will be done through any verdict, but is central to his objective as president.
And on COVID, we're seeing numbers again with cases rising. 1,000 people a day are still dying, heading into what many experts fear could be a winter surge. Is the message from the White House a little bit shifting more to the virus is here to stay and going from pandemic to endemic, but heading into the holiday season where so many are traveling again, where it is so different from last year, as the president has noted? What can you tell people who are a little alarmed by these growing numbers?
Well, first we would encourage people to look at some other numbers that are very encouraging, which is last year we had 250 million adults in this country who are unvaccinated because the vaccines weren't approved yet and highly at risk of illness, hospitalization, and death from COVID. People were not gathering with their family members last year. This year we've cut that number to 50 million adults who remain unvaccinated, given 82% of adults have received at least one dose. We now have vaccines that are accessible, they're free, they're convenient, they're life-saving. And we now have vaccines for kids as people are thinking about gathering with their children and young ones or grandchildren, et cetera. So things are certainly different than they were 1 year ago. And boosters are readily available. And we've dramatically scaled up testing and millions of rapid tests. So I would encourage people to look at the fact that now that vaccines are readily available, something 82% of the country, adults, have taken the opportunity to get vaccinated. You're 9 times more likely to be hospitalized or die from the virus if you're not vaccinated. We are in a different place than we were a year ago. And certainly we have more work to do, but we're going to continue the fight against the virus.
Go ahead, Steve.
Back on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve,
Sure.
The president made note of the fact that this is the largest release ever, larger than after Hurricane Katrina, larger than after the 1991 Iraq War. The Energy Secretary, in response to Rachel's question, was not able to explain what impact this might actually have for drivers. So how did you arrive at 50 million barrels? Where did that number come from? It's the largest release ever. Why? What's the goal?
Well, as I noted a little bit earlier, Steve, 18 million barrels of this sale was, in fact, already congressionally required, and the president's accelerating that, which is important for people to understand. Yes, it's a part of the largest release, but he just moved it forward a couple of months to provide immediate relief as we work to ensure there's a bridge. The remaining 32 million is in the form of an exchange, putting barrels on the market now in exchange for their return in the future, and the exchange is a tool matched to today's specific economic environment. But again, I would reiterate that we're facing a once-in-a-lifetime recovery from a pandemic, which has impacted us in many ways, including the cost of some goods around the world, including the cost of gas, and increasing the supply, something we've asked OPEC Plus member countries to do, and we will continue to press them to do, but we're going to use every tool at our disposal to do that. And the president took this step because he's going to do everything he can to lower costs for the American people. He knows that the price of gas is something that is impacting people as they go into the holiday season, as they're working and looking at their budgets, and that's why he took this significant step today.
I'm still curious how 50 million was reached, but I want to ask you also to follow up on Alex's question about China. The president made a point of saying that India, Japan, South Korea, and the UK would release, but he also said China may do more as well. Was he intending to separate China? Is China not publicly committed? You just said it a minute ago. I'm just trying to get some clarity.
They announced last week that they were intending to, Steve.
So why would the president separate China when he said that India, Japan, South Korea, and the UK would, but China may do more? Was he not wanting to speak for China?
He doesn't want to speak for any country, but again, he's had conversations, as our national security team has, with any of these countries, and we'll let them speak for any announcements they have to make. Go ahead, Alex.
Did President Biden bring up this topic with President Xi when they spoke?
They did talk about it, which I think was in the readout we issued afterwards.
But he specifically asked him to help out with
They
this effort.
did talk about the supply out there. I'm not going to detail it any further than that.
And secondly, on Ukraine, just a little bit more, do you have any updates on us on how the White House is assessing the situation there? Are there any plans for a phone call, for example, with President Putin?
I don't have anything to preview along those lines at this point in time. I will reiterate that we remain in very close contact with our European partners from the State Department, a range of levels from the President's National Security team. While I have nothing to announce or preview today, I would just remind you all that we announced we'll be sending more than $60 million in security assistance during President Zelensky's visit to the United States earlier this year as part of the U.S.-Ukraine Strategic Partnership Agreement, and we have sent more than $400 million overall this year to support Ukraine's sovereignty. So I just wanted to note that, given that was some time ago, but that is something that we had committed to during that meeting, and we've repeatedly demonstrated under this president's leadership that we are willing to use a number of tools to address harmful Russian actions. And that is something we will continue to convey, obviously, through direct conversations and in coordination with our European partners as well.
But just to follow up on that Ukraine question, Ukrainian officials have publicly called for more U.S. weaponry to help them defend themselves. And is the administration willing to do that? And would the U.S. provide military advisors to aid the Ukrainian government?
We are in close touch with the Ukrainian leaders, but I don't have anything to preview today.
Go ahead.
White House officials have previously said they think inflation is transitory. Is that still the view of the White House right now?
That's the view of the Federal Reserve and outside economic experts, most importantly.
And secondly, in terms of gas prices, you talked a lot about bringing them down. Is there a specific price per gallon at the pump that the White House is aiming to get to or would be satisfied to see?
We just want to continue to lower it, and we'll look at a range of tools to do that. I would note that because, as Secretary Granholm touched on, because of the discussions around the parallel release of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we did see a 10% decrease in the price of oil. That has not translated to a reduction of the price of gas, hence the president sending the letter to the FTC. And I would note that record oil profits and oil CEOs bragging about the profits they make from the price of gas certainly sends the message that something isn't quite right there. So point is, there's a number of steps that the president will continue to press on and push on, but I'm not going to make a prediction of where it will be. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. Two questions, if I may. The State Department is urging Americans to leave Ethiopia, but now that commercial flights remain available. You have to leave now. Now is the time to leave. Two State Department officials said yesterday the military will not be deployed for mass evacuation. Should we consider that diplomacy has failed or is failing in Ethiopia?
The president, the State Department is simply conveying directly to American citizens who wish to depart that they need to do so while commercial airlines are still up and functioning. I got to just keep moving because we're going to run out of time. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I have to just keep going on. Go ahead.
You announced yesterday that 95% of federal workers who are covered under the president's COVID vaccine requirement have complied. I'm curious about which agencies have the highest compliance rate and which have the lowest.
The good news, if you're working tomorrow, is that OMB is going to release a chart that gives you all of this sort of data tomorrow. They just needed a little bit of time to compile everything together, but we'll have that out tomorrow, and you'll see for yourself.
Do you know if that data will specify how many people at each agency requested a religious exemption and how many got one?
There are exemptions for a variety, not just religious exemptions. There are a couple of reasons for exemptions that is all done through HR. I haven't seen the exact chart or data, so I can't preview that for you, but we will be putting that out through OMB tomorrow. Go ahead.
Just to look ahead on this issue of gas prices, when OPEC Plus meets next week, is the White House still calling on them to increase production to ease pressures in the longer term? Is that the big picture?
Well, as I conveyed earlier, they have committed to, I believe I said, about 400, if I'm correct here, let me just get it right, release an additional 400,000 barrels, I assume, and our hope and expectation is that they will continue and abide by that commitment.
How worried are you that this announcement today could backfire and actually get them to say we're not going to increase production at all?
Again, we are communicating directly with them. I'm not going to speak for them. As you know, they have a meeting next week, and we have been in close contact with them for months now, conveying and advocating for an increase in supply, a release of supply to meet the demand. But also, we have been very clear that we would take actions if needed as well. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. A month ago, you said that the president would, in the coming weeks, lay out options to fundamentally alter the filibuster. Can you give any update on that?
I don't have any update. He spoke to this, as many of you know, at a CNN town hall a couple of weeks ago himself, but I don't have anything in addition to preview.
You know, you said coming weeks, so should we expect something by the end of the year? Or
We'll see. We'll see. We have a few more weeks in the end of the year. Go ahead, April.
Jen, you spoke previously about the divisions in this nation as it relates to recent trial verdicts. What does this administration have to offer or say as we await the verdict in Georgia in the McMichael crime case?
I'm not going to speak to any case that is where there has not been a verdict. And I'm sure we will have a comment once there is. But I will say broadly, April, that of course, as we've watched over the last, not just last year, obviously long before that, last few years, and we have seen violence on the streets. We've seen people lose their lives. The president has spoken himself many times to the case of Ahmaud Arbery. And while we're not going to speak to the particular an ongoing trial, I would point you to a long array of comments he's made about his horror in that case. And as it was asked earlier, one of the reasons he ran for president, as you've all heard him speak about, is to help bring the country together, to help address racial injustice in this country, help do that through whatever role the federal government can play. Doesn't expect that to be all done in the first year, but we're going to continue to press forward.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, great, thank you. Oh, okay, Francesca, go ahead, one more.
Thank you very much, Jen. President Biden, you, other members of the administration have repeatedly told Americans that wages are up, unemployment is down, the shelves are being stocked, and that the administration is working to address rising prices, including in a speech that the president gave today. So why does the White House think that its messaging isn't convincing many Americans that the economy is getting better?
Well, I've spoken about this a little bit in the past, but I would say that, one, we're still in the middle of fighting a global pandemic, and people are sick and tired of that. We are too. And it impacts how people are living their lives, their fear about sending their kids out the door, about going to work. It's impacting. The economy is just turning back on again, and we're seeing the impacts of that, whether it relates to the ability, unsticking the bottlenecks in the supply chain, or it relates to the rise in gas prices. The important thing for the American people to know and understand is that the president has a plan to address these issues, whether it's the action he took today to take one of the steps, in his view, we can take to lower the price of gas, or the steps he's anti-competition, the steps he's taken to address meat conglomerates who are making record profits and rising the price of meat out there, or whether it's the Build Back Better agenda that will help lower costs for working people. And what I think you're going to see us do more and more is draw the contrast. We have a plan to address these issues, lower prices for the American people, and we're not seeing a lot of ideas on the other side. So that's what you'll preview for when we come back from Thanksgiving. Everyone have a happy Thanksgiving with your families. I'll look forward to seeing you, or I'll be here tomorrow, but we won't have a briefing. But all right, bye guys.